It all started on a Saturday evening, just another dinner gathering with my closest friends. We'd been friends for years, sharing gossip, love stories, and the ups and downs of life. We were sitting around the table, sipping wine, and discussing the usual topics. We all had our opinions on men, on relationships, on the things that made or broke us. But that night, the conversation took an unexpected turn. It began innocently enough, with one of my friends, Sarah, talking about her new boyfriend. She mentioned how he was great in every way, handsome, kind, supportive. But then, she casually dropped that he hated going to clubs. He didn't enjoy the loud music, the crowded dance floors, the chaos of it all. She seemed a little disappointed by this, almost like it was a flaw in his character. I didn't think much of it at first, but then the words slipped out of my mouth before I could stop them. You know, I've always believed that men who avoid clubs are controlling. I mean, what's the harm in having fun? It's not like we're doing anything wrong, right? I chuckled a little, thinking it was just a harmless remark. The table fell silent. My words hung in the air like an uncomfortable fog. I didn't understand why the room had suddenly grown cold. I looked around, expecting some laughter or a casual response, but instead, everyone seemed to be looking at me differently. Sarah was the first to speak. I don't know, Emma. I think it's more about personal preference. Some people just don't like crowds. Oh, come on, I replied, trying to brush it off. It's not about personal preference. There's something about a guy who refuses to go out with his girlfriend. It's like he's trying to control her, make her feel guilty for having a good time. The conversation shifted, but the awkwardness lingered. No one seemed eager to continue talking about it, and the mood of the dinner had completely changed. For some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had said something wrong, but I dismissed it. It was just an opinion, after all, wasn't it? I had always been vocal about my views on relationships, and I prided myself on being confident in my beliefs. As the night wore on, I noticed that Jack, my husband, was unusually quiet. He had been sitting next to me, as usual, but he wasn't engaging in the conversation. He seemed lost in thought, staring at his drink, not even responding when I casually mentioned that we should plan a night out at the club soon. Maybe we should do something fun this weekend, you know? Hit the clubs, have a good time, I said, trying to reignite the energy of the evening. He just nodded, but his response was distant, almost absent. Later that night, when we were back home, I noticed something strange. Jack didn't seem like himself. He wasn't angry or upset, but there was this sense of distance between us. He wasn't cracking jokes like he normally did. He didn't kiss me goodbye when I went to bed, which was unusual. Something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. The next morning, things were still tense. It wasn't obvious, but I could feel the shift. Jack didn't say much as he got ready for work, and when I asked him what was wrong, he simply shrugged and said, "Nothing, just tired." I didn't press it further. He had always been a private person, not one to openly discuss his feelings. But that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something. Jack didn't like going to clubs, and I had criticized him for it. I had made it sound like it was a flaw, a sign of him being controlling, when in fact, he was simply being himself. My words had been too harsh, too quick, and now I was beginning to see the consequences. I didn't know it then, but my careless remark about men who avoid clubs being controlling would come to haunt me in ways I couldn't have imagined. The damage had already been done, and the first cracks in our relationship had started to form. All because of one impulsive statement made in the heat of a conversation. The days that followed felt strange, like something had shifted in the air, but I couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. I went about my usual routine, work, hanging out with friends, running errands, but there was this underlying tension that I couldn't shake. It wasn't obvious, but it was there, like a quiet storm brewing on the horizon. At first, I thought it was just me overthinking things. Maybe I had said something wrong, but Jack hadn't mentioned it. He wasn't the type to openly argue, especially not about trivial things. He preferred to keep things to himself, and maybe, just maybe, it would blow over. But each day, I noticed subtle changes in him that I couldn't ignore. When I came home from work, he was there, but he wasn't his usual self. Usually, he'd greet me with a kiss or a joke about how his day went. But now, he was distant, his eyes vacant as he scrolled through his phone or stared at the TV. He didn't ask about my day, didn't inquire about the details of my plans with friends. He was there physically, but mentally, it was like I was talking to a stranger. It was a small thing at first, a lack of enthusiasm, but I felt it. I couldn't help but feel a little bit of panic rising inside me. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I tried to engage him in a conversation about our weekend plans. I asked if he wanted to go out and do something fun, maybe a low-key dinner, something to lift the mood. He shrugged, his gaze still glued to the screen of his phone. Maybe we can do something this weekend, I suggested lightly, trying to get a reaction. Like, I don't know, hit up a club or something. It could be fun. He didn't look up. Yeah, sure, he muttered. It was the tone, flat, uninterested, that made my stomach twist. Jack had never been this way. He wasn't always the most enthusiastic person, but he was never so distant. I could feel my frustration building. Was he mad at me for something? Did I do something wrong? Are you okay? I asked, my voice laced with concern. Fine, he replied, but his eyes didn't meet mine. There was a clear disconnect between us, a growing chasm I hadn't seen coming. I brushed it off. Maybe he was tired, maybe it was just one of those days. But as the days turned into weeks, the pattern became clearer. He wasn't withdrawing because of fatigue or stress. He was withdrawing because of something deeper, something unspoken. And I began to realize that I was the cause of it. It hit me one evening as I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. My words at the dinner table, the comment I had made about men avoiding clubs being controlling, kept echoing in my head. I hadn't just made a joke, I had belittled something Jack had always stood by. He wasn't controlling. He simply didn't enjoy the same things I did. But I had turned it into something ugly, something negative. I tried to talk to him again the next day. Jack, can we talk about what's been going on? You've been really quiet lately, and I'm starting to get worried. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. It's nothing, Emma. Just, things are different now. Different how? I pressed. We've always been able to talk about stuff. He finally looked at me, his eyes tired and distant. You know, I've been thinking a lot about what you said that night. About me being controlling because I don't want to go out to clubs. I never thought that was a problem, Emma. But now I'm wondering, maybe I'm not what you want. I felt a pang in my chest. The guilt hit me like a freight train. I hadn't realized how my words had cut him. He wasn't mad at me in the way I thought, he was hurt. He was questioning himself because of something I had carelessly said. I didn't mean it like that, I said quickly, my voice shaking. I never thought you were controlling. I don't know. I just wanted us to have fun together. I thought it was a problem. But it wasn't a problem. I had made it one. I had let my need for validation, for approval from my friends, color my perception of who Jack was. And now, I was paying the price. Jack didn't say much after that. He just stared at me, silent, as if he was lost in his thoughts. It was then that I realized how far I had pushed him away. I had made him feel small for something that didn't matter. And now, the silence between us felt suffocating. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to fix it, but I couldn't undo the damage I had done. Jack's withdrawal had become more than just a shift in mood, it was a sign that things between us had already started to break down. And it was all because of my words, my thoughtless judgment. The silence between Jack and me continued to stretch, growing heavier with each passing day. I tried to bridge the gap, initiating conversations, suggesting outings, even attempting to apologize, but nothing seemed to reach him. It was like speaking to a wall, his responses short and impersonal, his once warm presence now reduced to a quiet shadow in our home. I couldn't ignore the growing tension. We were no longer the couple we had once been. The little moments of connection, the inside jokes, the shared glances that spoke volumes, those were gone. Instead, there was a constant sense of unease, a weight I couldn't shake off. Jack wasn't angry. He wasn't throwing things or raising his voice. He wasn't even giving me the satisfaction of a fight. He was simply withdrawing. One evening, a week after the awkward conversation, I came home to find him sitting at the kitchen table, his eyes fixed on his laptop. It was the first time he'd been home early in days, and I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. I was desperate to talk to him, to somehow fix whatever was broken between us, but I didn't know where to start. "Hey," I said gently, trying to sound casual as I set my bag down on the counter. "How was your day?" "Fine," he muttered, his fingers still typing on the keyboard without pause. "Just busy." I could tell he wasn't really listening. The words were automatic, rehearsed responses that didn't match the distance I felt between us. His body was here, but his mind? That was a different story. I leaned against the counter, taking a deep breath before attempting again. "Jack, we need to talk," I said, my voice a little steadier than I felt. "I don't like how things have been lately. This silence, it's not good for either of us." He stopped typing for a moment, his fingers hovering over the keys. But when he finally spoke, his voice was flat, distant. "I don't know what you want me to say, Emma. You've already said it all." My heart sank. The way he said it, like it didn't matter anymore, made me feel like the conversation was over before it had even begun. It felt like he had already checked out, and I was just grasping at straws, trying to hold on to something that was slipping through my fingers. "I didn't mean to hurt you," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "I didn't understand what I was doing. What I said, it was stupid. I just wanted us to have fun together, but I made it sound like you were the problem." He didn't look at me. His eyes remained fixed on the screen in front of him. "You don't get it, do you?" His voice was quiet, almost too soft, but there was an edge to it. "I don't care about the clubs, Emma. I don't care about the things you and your friends think are fun. What bothers me is how you make everything about that. How you make me feel like I'm less of a person because I don't fit into your idea of what's normal." I blinked, stunned by his words. "I never meant to make you feel that way." "But you did," he said, his voice still calm, but the hurt was there. "And you've been doing it for a while. Every time you bring up what men should be like or how they should behave to fit into your world, it chips away at me. I don't fit your mold, Emma. And I'm not going to pretend to." The pain in his voice was undeniable. I had always thought I was just being playful, joking around, but now I saw how my words had become a pattern of dismissal. He wasn't just a man who didn't like clubs, he was someone I had consistently made feel inadequate because he didn't meet some arbitrary standard I had created in my head. For the first time in a long while, the truth hit me like a punch in the gut. I had never really seen Jack for who he was, not completely, not as someone who deserved my respect and appreciation for who he was. Instead, I had judged him, made assumptions, and placed expectations on him that weren't fair. I had ignored his feelings in favor of a narrative I wanted to believe in. "I never meant to hurt you," I repeated, but my voice cracked. "I see that now. And I'm so sorry, Jack. I'm really sorry." He didn't respond right away. The silence stretched between us again, but it felt different now, more like a pause than an end. He finally looked up at me, his eyes tired but softening a little. "I just don't know if I can keep doing this," he whispered, the words heavy with finality. I don't know if I can keep being someone I'm not just to make you happy." His words stung. I had been so focused on my own image of what our relationship should look like that I had forgotten to see him for who he truly was. I had tried to mold him into something he wasn't, and now I was faced with the possibility of losing him because of it. The weight of that realization settled in my chest like a stone. I had been wrong, and now it felt like I was losing the one person I cared about the most. I wasn't sure how to fix it, but I knew one thing for certain: I needed to change. I couldn't keep repeating the same mistakes, thinking I could control or shape someone into my ideal. Jack wasn't a project or a reflection of my social circle. He was Jack, and I had to learn how to love him as he was. But the question was it too late? The days following our conversation felt like a blur, a mix of frustration, regret, and a desperate yearning for some kind of resolution. Jack had withdrawn even further, and every attempt I made to bridge the gap between us only seemed to push him away more. The silence in our home grew louder, until it felt like the space between us was more than just physical. It was emotional, like an abyss that neither of us knew how to cross. I spent my nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering where things had gone wrong. My thoughts spiraled, filled with doubt and self-blame. I had made a mistake, a huge one, and I didn't know if I could fix it. I kept replaying everything in my head, the words I had carelessly spoken, the way I had assumed Jack wasn't good enough because he didn't share the same interests as my friends. How had I become this person? How had I let my insecurities and need for approval shape the way I treated the person I loved most? It wasn't until one evening, as I was scrolling through my phone aimlessly, that something clicked. A post caught my eye. A friend from high school had shared an article about relationships and the importance of empathy and understanding. I had seen similar articles before, but something about this one felt different. The words struck a chord with me, especially the part about how love isn't about fitting someone into the mold you've created, it's about accepting them for who they are, flaws and all. That's when it hit me. I had been so focused on what I thought was right in a relationship that I had completely missed the point. I wasn't accepting Jack for who he was. I was trying to change him, to mold him into someone who could meet my expectations and impress my friends. But that wasn't love. Love was about seeing the person for who they were, respecting their differences, and finding a way to make it work despite those differences. I was ashamed of myself. I had let my insecurities take over, and I had turned my relationship with Jack into something it was never supposed to be. I had taken him for granted, assuming he would always be there, but I hadn't taken the time to nurture our connection. Now, I was losing him, and it was entirely my fault. The next day, I woke up with a new sense of clarity. I knew what I needed to do. I couldn't fix everything in one conversation, but I could start by taking responsibility for my actions and showing Jack that I truly understood the mistake I had made. I had to prove to him that I was willing to change, that I was committed to accepting him for who he was, not who I thought he should be. I found him in the living room, as usual, staring at his phone. His posture was slumped, like he was trying to disappear into the couch. It hurt to see him like this, so distant and withdrawn. But I couldn't let the fear of rejection hold me back. I had to take the first step. "Jack," I said softly, sitting down beside him. He looked at me, his expression guarded but not cold. "I've been thinking," I continued, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About how I've treated you, about what I've said. I've been wrong, and I'm sorry. I've tried to make you fit into this idea I had in my head about what a relationship should look like, and in doing that, I've made you feel like you weren't good enough. And that's not true." He didn't say anything, but his eyes softened, just a little. That was something. "I want to change," I said, my voice trembling now. "I don't want to keep making the same mistakes. I want to love you for who you are, not who I think you should be. I know I've hurt you, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. And I'll do whatever it takes to show you that I can be the partner you deserve." He was quiet for a long moment, and I held my breath, waiting for some kind of response. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to change for me, Emma, he said, his gaze softening. You just have to be real. You've always been so caught up in what other people think, in what they want from you, that you lost sight of what we need. But if you can find a way to be yourself, truly be yourself, and accept me for who I am, we can figure this out. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be honest. His words were like a balm to my wounded heart. It wasn't a complete resolution, not yet, but it was a start. He was still here, still willing to listen, still willing to try. And that was more than I had expected. I will, I promised him, feeling a weight lift off my chest. I will, Jack. I'll be honest. I'll be real. I'll be the person you deserve. It wasn't a perfect solution, and I knew that. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like we could move forward. The road ahead would be difficult, but at least we were taking the first steps toward healing, toward rebuilding the trust that had been broken. And that was enough for now. It had been a few weeks since that conversation, and while the road to healing wasn't easy, I could feel things slowly starting to shift. Jack and I had found a new rhythm, one that didn't involve trying to change each other, but instead embraced our differences. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace between us. We had started talking more openly about everything. Our dreams, our frustrations, our fears. We no longer tiptoed around the hard subjects, afraid of upsetting each other. Instead, we faced them head-on, with honesty and vulnerability. And though it wasn't always easy, I could feel us growing closer again, like we were finding our way back to the people we had once been, before the pressure of outside expectations had made us lose sight of each other. One evening, as we sat on the couch, wrapped in blankets and watching a movie together, Jack turned to me, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. You know, he said, his voice soft, I've been thinking. Maybe we should try that thing you wanted to do, go out with your friends, to a club or something. Just to see what it's like. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by the suggestion. Wait, seriously? Yeah, he chuckled. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the whole scene, but if it means something to you, I'm willing to give it a shot. You were right. I shouldn't have dismissed it so quickly. I was taken aback. Not because I thought it was a bad idea, but because it felt like a small act of trust, a willingness to meet me halfway. It wasn't about him becoming someone he wasn't, but about opening up to the things that mattered to me, even if they weren't his cup of tea. I don't want you to feel like you have to do it for me, I said, my voice earnest. But I appreciate it. I really do. I know, he said, squeezing my hand. But if I'm being honest, I think it could be fun. It's about being part of each other's world, right? It was one of those small moments that felt like a breakthrough. We weren't trying to force each other into some mold anymore. We were just being ourselves, with all our quirks and differences, and that was enough. The following weekend, we went out with my friends. Jack was awkward at first, not knowing anyone, but he was patient and gave it a shot. As the night went on, he started to relax, laughing at the jokes, chatting with people, and even dancing a little when the music picked up. I could see the walls that had once been up between us start to crumble, replaced with genuine laughter and connection. Later that night, when we were driving home, Jack turned to me, a smile still on his face. I guess I was wrong about clubs. It wasn't as bad as I thought. I laughed, feeling a warmth spread through me. I'm glad you had fun. I'm glad we did this together, he said, his voice soft but sincere. I feel like we're starting to get back to where we were, you know? That was all I needed to hear. In that moment, I realized something important. The key to a lasting relationship wasn't about finding someone who was perfect or who met every single one of your expectations. It was about understanding, compromise, and above all, respect for who the other person truly was. We didn't have to change for each other, we just had to be willing to grow, together. Over the next few months, things continued to improve. We found new ways to communicate, to understand each other's needs, and to support one another without judgment. Our relationship felt more balanced, more real, than it had in a long time. I also learned something important about myself in the process. I had spent so much time trying to fit Jack into a mold that I had created in my head, trying to make him conform to my idea of what a perfect relationship should look like. But the truth was, there was no such thing as perfect. We were imperfect, flawed, but we were right for each other, in our own unique way. Our story wasn't one of grand gestures or sweeping romance. It was the story of two people who had learned to see each other for who they truly were, and who had found a way to love each other, not in spite of their differences, but because of them. And in the end, that was more than enough.